Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Fort Benning with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. The Georgia heat hit her like a wall, but she kept her chin up as she joined the line of new recruits. At 22, she had left behind a comfortable life as a graphic designer to pursue her dream of serving her country. Despite her family's protests, the other recruits around her looked just as nervous. But Sarah noticed the sideways glances and whispered comments almost immediately. She was one of only 3 women in their platoon, and her petite frame and artistic background made her an easy target. Within the first hour, she overheard someone call her art girl in a mocking tone. Drill Sergeant Williams, an intimidating man with steel gray eyes and a voice that could shatter glass, lined them up for their first inspection. His gaze swept over each recruit with military precision, lingering just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. When he reached Sarah, his expression remained neutral, but she caught a flicker of something she couldn't quite identify. The first week was brutal. Physical training began before dawn, and Sarah struggled to keep up with the grueling pace. Push-ups, sit-ups, and endless running circuits pushed her body to its limits. The male recruits who had initially seemed friendly grew increasingly hostile as they noticed her determination. They started calling her princess and making jokes about her painted nails, which she had forgotten to remove before arriving. During mealtimes, Sarah often found herself eating alone as whispered conversations stopped when she approached. The other female recruits, Jennifer and Amanda, seemed to distance themselves from her, perhaps hoping to avoid becoming targets themselves. Sarah understood their strategy, but couldn't help feeling isolated and hurt by their rejection. The teasing escalated during their second week. Private Johnson, a tall recruit from Texas with a cruel smile, started a rumor that Sarah had only joined the military to find a husband. Others picked up on this narrative, suggesting she wasn't serious about her commitment. During equipment checks, someone would mysteriously misplace her gear, forcing her to scramble to find replacements and earn extra punishment drills. One particularly difficult morning, after Sarah had completed her 100th push-up as punishment for someone else's sabotage, Private Thompson loudly wondered if Little Princess would cry and quit before the end of the month. Several recruits laughed, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She bit her tongue and focused on her breathing, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The physical challenges were nothing compared to the emotional warfare. During their third week, someone spread rumors about her family background, claiming she came from wealth and was just playing soldier. The truth was far different. Sarah had worked 3 jobs to pay for college and had joined the military partly for the educational benefits. But she never defended herself verbally, instead channeling her frustration into her training. Drill Sergeant Williams observed everything with his characteristic stoic expression. He never intervened directly in the social dynamics between recruits, following the military tradition of letting them work out their own hierarchies. However, Sarah sometimes caught him watching her with an intensity that made her wonder what he was thinking. The breaking point came during their 4th week when Private Johnson deliberately knocked over Sarah's carefully arranged bunk during inspection preparation. Her personal items scattered across the floor, including a framed photo of her younger brother in his wheelchair. Johnson stepped on the frame, cracking the glass, and laughed when he saw her expression. For the first time since arriving at boot camp, Sarah felt tears threaten to spill over. She knelt to gather her belongings, her hands shaking with suppressed rage and hurt. The other recruits watched in silence, some looking uncomfortable but none willing to help or defend her. She carefully picked up the broken frame, thinking of her brother who had always encouraged her dreams despite his own challenges. That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. The physical demands she could handle, even embrace, but the constant psychological pressure was wearing her down. She thought about her brother's words before she left. "Show them what real strength looks like, sis." She realized she hadn't been showing them anything except how to be a victim. The next morning brought a new determination. During physical training, Sarah pushed herself harder than ever before, completing every exercise with precision and power. She stopped acknowledging the taunts and focused entirely on her performance. When Private Johnson tried to trip her during formation, she sidestepped smoothly and continued marching without missing a beat. Her newfound focus didn't go unnoticed. Drill Sergeant Williams began watching her even more closely, and Sarah sensed a shift in his attention. During weapons training, he corrected her stance with unusual patience, his instructions detailed and helpful, rather than the usual barked commands. She wondered if he was finally seeing her potential, rather than just another struggling recruit who might wash out. The morning sun blazed mercilessly as the recruits assembled for what Drill Sergeant Williams announced would be their most challenging week yet. Sarah had been at boot camp for over a month now, and her body had transformed from soft and untrained to lean and powerful. Her calloused hands gripped her rifle with confidence, and her uniform hung perfectly on her newly muscled frame. Private Johnson and his followers had intensified their campaign against her, seemingly frustrated by her refusal to break. They had moved beyond simple name-calling to more sophisticated psychological warfare. During the previous night's sleep, someone had short-sheeted her bunk and hidden dead insects in her boots. Sarah had discovered these pranks with her usual stoic silence, cleaning up the mess and preparing for the next day without complaint. The other recruits watched these interactions with growing discomfort. Even those who had initially participated in the teasing began to feel uneasy about the escalating cruelty. Jennifer, one of the other female recruits, had started leaving small gestures of support, an extra energy bar slipped onto Sarah's bunk or a whispered good job after particularly difficult drills. Drill Sergeant Williams maintained his professional distance, but Sarah noticed subtle changes in his behavior. During rifle cleaning sessions, he would position himself where he could observe her work, and she caught him nodding slightly when she demonstrated proper technique. His critiques of her performance had become more constructive, focusing on refinement rather than basic competence. The week's major challenge was announced as a 3-day field exercise in the Georgia wilderness. The recruits would be divided into small teams, given minimal supplies, and expected to navigate, survive, and complete various military objectives. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and dread, knowing this would provide her tormentors with new opportunities away from the watchful eyes of the base. When team assignments were announced, Sarah found herself grouped with Private Johnson, Private Thompson, and 2 other recruits who had consistently participated in the harassment. She suspected this wasn't coincidental but couldn't prove it. The knowing smirks on their faces confirmed her fears about the next 3 days. Their first objective required hiking 12 miles through dense forest to reach a designated checkpoint. Sarah shouldered her pack, heavier than the others due to accidental redistribution of supplies, and began the march. Within the first hour, Johnson began his usual commentary about her endurance and commitment, clearly trying to break her spirit before the real challenges began. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they climbed into the hills. Sarah's smaller stature actually became an advantage as she navigated through thick underbrush that slowed down her larger teammates. She took point navigation duties, reading the map and compass with skills learned from childhood camping trips with her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran who had taught her to love the outdoors. By midday, it became clear that Sarah was the strongest navigator in the group. While the others argued about directions and complained about the heat, she quietly kept them on course toward their objective. Private Thompson grudgingly admitted she seemed to know what she was doing, earning him a sharp look from Johnson, who clearly didn't want to acknowledge any of her competencies. Their first night in the field tested everyone's limits. Sarah efficiently set up her shelter and organized her gear, while the others struggled with basic camping tasks. She had deliberately not offered help, knowing it would be rejected and potentially used against her later. Instead, she focused on her own preparation and quietly observed their mistakes. The temperature dropped significantly after sunset, and Sarah was grateful for the extra clothing she had packed despite the weight penalty. She listened to the others shivering in their inadequate shelters and felt a moment of satisfaction. Her grandfather's lessons about preparation and self-reliance were proving invaluable in ways she hadn't expected. During the second day, their group faced a tactical exercise requiring them to approach a simulated enemy position without detection. Sarah's artistic eye, trained to notice details and patterns, made her exceptionally good at spotting camouflaged obstacles and potential threats. She began pointing out dangers and opportunities that the others had missed entirely. Private Johnson grew increasingly frustrated as Sarah's competence became undeniable. His attempts at sabotage began to backfire as other team members started relying on her judgment for navigation and tactical decisions. When he deliberately gave her wrong information about their next objective, The resulting confusion made it obvious to everyone that he was prioritizing harassment over mission success. The turning point came during their final night in the field. A severe thunderstorm rolled through their campsite, turning their carefully planned exercise into a genuine survival situation. While the others panicked about their flooding shelters and scattered equipment, Sarah calmly secured her gear and began helping those who needed assistance, putting mission and team safety above personal grudges. Private Thompson, soaked and miserable, watched in amazement as Sarah shared her dry clothing and helped him rebuild his collapsed shelter. She worked efficiently and without commentary, focused entirely on practical solutions rather than scoring social points. For the first time, he saw her as a soldier rather than a target. When they returned to base, mud-stained and exhausted but successful in their mission, Drill Sergeant Williams was waiting for their debriefing. Each team member was questioned individually about leadership, teamwork, and performance during the exercise. Sarah answered his questions honestly and thoroughly, neither complaining about her treatment nor claiming credit she hadn't earned. The other recruits' reports painted a clear picture of her capabilities and character. Even Johnson, when pressed for specific examples, couldn't deny her contributions to their success. Williams listened to everything with his usual impassive expression, making notes that would become part of their permanent records. The weeks following the field exercise brought a noticeable shift in the platoon's dynamics. Word had spread about Sarah's performance during the survival challenge, and several recruits who had previously ignored her began showing grudging respect. Private Thompson had quietly stopped participating in Johnson's harassment campaigns, and even Amanda, one of the other female recruits, had started acknowledging Sarah with brief nods during formations. However, Private Johnson seemed determined to escalate his efforts rather than accept defeat. His tactics became more personal and vicious, focusing on Sarah's appearance and questioning her motivations for joining the military. During one particularly heated exchange in the mess hall, he loudly speculated about her personal life and family background, drawing uncomfortable stares from nearby tables. Sarah maintained her disciplined silence, but internally she was reaching her breaking point. The constant psychological pressure was exhausting, and she found herself having trouble sleeping despite her physical fatigue. She began questioning whether the military was truly where she belonged, wondering if her brother's encouragement had been misguided optimism rather than realistic assessment of her capabilities. Drill Sergeant Williams had been observing these developments with increasing concern. While he couldn't intervene directly in recruit conflicts without undermining the training process, he was beginning to see a pattern of behavior that went beyond normal military hazing. His years of experience told him that Johnson's harassment had crossed the line from character building into deliberate sabotage. The situation came to a head during their 7th week when the platoon was scheduled for combat fitness testing. This comprehensive evaluation would test every aspect of their training, from physical endurance to tactical knowledge to performance under pressure. Sarah had been preparing intensively, knowing that her scores would largely determine her future military career opportunities. The night before the test, someone tampered with Sarah's equipment. Her rifle had been disassembled and poorly reassembled, her boots had been filled with sand, and her uniform had been deliberately stained with what appeared to be motor oil. The sabotage was discovered just hours before the testing began, leaving Sarah scrambling to clean and repair her gear while her competitors rested. Despite the setback, Sarah performed exceptionally well on the physical components of the test. Her months of intensive training had built her into a formidable athlete, and she completed the obstacle course with times that impressed even the instructors. Her marksmanship scores were among the highest in the platoon, and her tactical knowledge examination results exceeded expectations. During the final component of the test, a simulated combat scenario, Sarah demonstrated leadership qualities that surprised everyone, including herself. When their squad leader was designated as a casualty, she stepped up to coordinate their response, directing her teammates with calm authority and strategic thinking. Even Johnson followed her orders without question when faced with the pressure of completing their mission successfully. Drill Sergeant Williams watched these demonstrations with growing interest. His experienced eye could see potential that went far beyond basic soldiering skills. Sarah's combination of intelligence, determination, and natural leadership abilities marked her as someone who could excel in specialized military roles that required both physical and mental toughness. After the testing concluded, Williams approached Sarah privately for the first time since her arrival at boot camp. His usual stern expression was replaced by something approaching curiosity as he asked about her background and motivations for military service. Sarah answered honestly, talking about her desire to serve her country and challenge herself in ways that civilian life couldn't provide. The conversation revealed depths to Sarah's character that weren't apparent from her personnel file. She spoke about her brother's influence on her decision, his disability caused by a military training accident, and her determination to honor his sacrificial service through her own commitment. Williams listened carefully, recognizing the genuine dedication behind her words. Over the following days, subtle changes in Sarah's treatment became apparent to the other recruits. Drill Sergeant Williams began giving her additional responsibilities and more complex assignments that challenged her growing capabilities. She was selected for advanced training opportunities and leadership, roles that typically went to the most promising candidates. Private Johnson watched these developments with growing resentment and desperation. His campaign against Sarah had not only failed but seemed to have backfired, elevating her status rather than destroying it. His attacks became more desperate and personal, culminating in a confrontation that would change everything for both of them. The incident occurred during what should have been a routine uniform inspection. Johnson had been making increasingly bold attempts to humiliate Sarah, and this morning he decided to escalate his harassment to a new level. While Sarah stood at attention during the inspection, he made crude comments about her body and questioned her commitment to military values. Sarah's composure finally cracked. Years of artistic training had given her excellent control over her emotions, but months of relentless harassment combined with Johnson's increasingly personal attacks pushed her past her breaking point. She turned to face him directly, her eyes blazing with suppressed fury and her voice deadly quiet as she told him exactly what she thought of his behavior. The confrontation quickly escalated into a physical altercation. Johnson, frustrated by his inability to break her spirit through psychological means, made the mistake of putting his hands on her. Sarah's response was swift and decisive, drawing on self-defense skills she had learned during her civilian life and enhanced through military training. Drill Sergeant Williams arrived to find Johnson on the ground and Sarah standing over him, her chest heaving with exertion and emotion. The other recruits watched in stunned silence, uncertain about what would happen next. Williams surveyed the scene with his characteristic calm, taking in every detail before making his decision about how to handle this unprecedented situation. The aftermath of the confrontation would prove to be a turning point not just for Sarah, but for the entire platoon's understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. The aftermath of the confrontation left the entire barracks in stunned silence. Private Johnson lay on the floor, more shocked than injured, while Sarah stood breathing heavily above him. Her perfectly pressed uniform was slightly disheveled, and her usually controlled expression showed the raw emotion she had kept buried for weeks. The other recruits formed a loose circle around them, unsure whether to intervene or step back. Drill Sergeant Williams surveyed the scene with the calculating gaze of someone who had witnessed countless similar incidents throughout his military career. His eyes moved from Johnson on the floor to Sarah's defensive stance, taking in the body language and positioning that told the real story of what had transpired. Years of experience had taught him to read these situations quickly and accurately. "Everyone back to your bunks," Williams commanded in his characteristic tone that brooked no argument. "Martinez, Johnson, you're with me." The other recruits scattered immediately, grateful to escape the tension that filled the air like smoke. Jennifer cast a worried glance back at Sarah before disappearing into the sleeping quarters, while Thompson shook his head in what might have been sympathy or disappointment. Williams led them to his office, a Spartan space dominated by military regulations, posters, and commendation certificates from his 20-year career. He gestured for them to sit in the two chairs facing his desk, then spent several long minutes reviewing paperwork while they waited in uncomfortable silence. Sarah kept her eyes forward while Johnson fidgeted and occasionally glared in her direction. "Johnson," Williams began without looking up from his files, "you've been walking a very thin line since day one. Your performance scores are mediocre at best, and your attitude toward fellow recruits has been noted in multiple reports." Johnson started to protest, but Williams silenced him with a raised hand. "I'm not finished. Your behavior today crossed from harassment into assault, which gives me grounds for immediate dismissal from this program. The blood drained from Johnson's face as he realized the seriousness of his situation. A dishonorable discharge from boot camp would follow him for the rest of his life, affecting employment opportunities and personal relationships. His family had a proud military tradition, and the shame of failing to complete basic training would be devastating to his reputation back home. Williams then turned his attention to Sarah, his expression unreadable but somehow less stern than his usual demeanor. Martinez, your conduct has been exemplary throughout this training cycle. Your test scores rank in the top 5% of recruits I've trained, and your leadership potential is obvious to anyone paying attention. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with confusion about where this conversation was heading. However, Williams continued, military discipline requires that physical altercations be addressed regardless of provocation. While I understand the circumstances that led to this incident, I cannot ignore the fact that you engaged in unauthorized combat with a fellow recruit. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that her moment of lost control might cost her everything she had worked toward. Williams stood and walked to the window, overlooking the training grounds where new recruits were practicing drill formations. His back was turned to them as he spoke, his voice carrying a weight that suggested years of difficult decisions. Johnson, you have two choices. You can accept immediate discharge for conduct unbecoming a soldier, or you can request transfer to a different platoon where you'll complete your training under closer supervision. Johnson chose the transfer option, knowing it was his only chance to salvage his military career. Williams made it clear that any further incidents would result in immediate dismissal, and that his new drill sergeant would be informed about his history of harassment. As Johnson left the office, he avoided looking at Sarah, his earlier bravado completely deflated. Once they were alone, Williams returned to his seat and studied Sarah with an intensity that made her increasingly nervous. She had no idea what to expect, having never been in serious trouble during her time at boot camp. The silence stretched between them until Williams finally spoke, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Martinez, I'm going to tell you something that stays in this room, he began, leaning forward slightly. In 20 years of training recruits, I've seen every type of personality and background imaginable. Most wash out because they lack either the physical capability or the mental toughness required for military service. A smaller group succeeds through pure determination and hard work. Williams paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. But occasionally, very rarely, I encounter someone who possesses something special. A combination of intelligence, courage, and moral character that marks them for exceptional service. You, Martinez, are one of those rare individuals. And I'll be damned if I let Johnson's stupidity derail your potential. Sarah felt tears threatening to spill over. Not from sadness, but from relief and gratitude. For weeks she had wondered if she truly belonged in the military, questioning whether her decision to leave her comfortable civilian life had been a mistake. Williams' words validated everything she had hoped to prove about herself. Your punishment, Williams continued, will be 2 weeks of additional duties and extra physical training. This goes on your record as a minor disciplinary action, but it won't affect your graduation or future assignments. Sarah nodded gratefully, understanding that this was far more lenient than what military regulations typically required for physical altercations. As she prepared to leave his office, Williams called her name one final time. Martinez, there's something else I need to discuss with you. Your personnel file mentions a tattoo that hasn't been inspected since your arrival. Military regulations require documentation of all body art for security clearance purposes. Sarah froze, her hand on the door handle, suddenly understanding why this conversation had taken an unexpected turn. The tattoo Williams referred to was hidden beneath her uniform, covering most of her back in an intricate design that told a story few people knew. She had gotten it during a dark period of her life, and it represented experiences and sacrifices that went far deeper than most people could imagine. The artwork was beautiful and meaningful, but the story behind it was something she had never shared with anyone in the military. Williams watched her reaction carefully, noting the sudden tension in her posture and the way her breathing changed. We'll need to document it properly, he said quietly. Tomorrow morning, report to the medical facility for official recording. Bring any documentation you have about the artist and date of application. Sarah nodded silently, her mind racing as she realized that her most closely guarded secret was about to be revealed. That night, Sarah lay awake in her bunk staring at the ceiling while her fellow recruits slept around her. The confrontation with Johnson seemed trivial compared to what awaited her in the morning. For months, she had successfully hidden the elaborate tattoo that covered most of her back, carefully timing her showers and changes to avoid exposure. Tomorrow, that privacy would end forever. The tattoo itself was a masterpiece of artistic design, created by one of the most renowned tattoo artists in the country. It depicted a phoenix rising from ashes, its wings spread across her shoulder blades in intricate detail. But the imagery held meaning that went far beyond artistic appreciation. The tattoo commemorated the most defining experience of her life, one that had shaped her decision to join the military in ways she had never shared with anyone. 3 years earlier, Sarah had been working as a graphic designer in Chicago when her younger brother Michael was deployed to Afghanistan. He was her closest friend and biggest supporter, the person who had encouraged her artistic pursuits when their parents wanted her to choose a more practical career. His deployment had been routine until an improvised explosive device changed everything during his final month of service. Michael survived the blast, but his injuries left him paralyzed from the waist down and struggling with traumatic brain injury. Sarah had spent months at his bedside, watching him fight through rehabilitation with the same determination that had always defined his character. During those dark days, she had gotten the phoenix tattoo as a symbol of their shared belief that they would both rise from this devastating experience stronger than before. The tattoo artist had incorporated elements that only Sarah and Michael understood. Hidden within the phoenix's feathers were military symbols, coordinates of his injury location and the date of his rescue. The ashes beneath the rising bird contained tiny script with quotes from their childhood conversations about honor, service, and sacrifice. It was simultaneously a work of art and a deeply personal memorial to her brother's service. Michael had recovered far more successfully than doctors initially predicted, eventually returning to college and becoming an advocate for disabled veterans. But Sarah's life had been permanently changed by witnessing his sacrifice and recovery. Her decision to join the military was directly inspired by his example, though she had never told anyone the complete story of how his injury had motivated her service. The next morning arrived too quickly. Sarah reported to the medical facility as ordered, her stomach churning with anxiety about revealing such personal information. The medical technician was professional and efficient, explaining that tattoo documentation was standard procedure for security clearances and overseas deployments. Sarah nodded and prepared to remove her shirt, knowing there was no way to avoid what came next. When the tattoo was fully exposed, the medical technician stopped mid-sentence and stared in obvious amazement. The artwork was far more elaborate and professionally executed than anything typically seen on military personnel. The phoenix seemed to come alive under the fluorescent lights, its detailed feathers and vibrant colors creating an almost three-dimensional effect across Sarah's entire back. "This is extraordinary work," the technician murmured while taking photographs. "For the official documentation, the level of detail and artistry is museum quality. This must have taken dozens of sessions and cost a fortune." Sarah confirmed the timeline and expense while providing the required information about the artist and studio, but she offered no explanation of the tattoo's personal significance. The documentation process took longer than usual due to the tattoo's size and complexity. Each element needed to be photographed and described in detail for the permanent record. Sarah answered questions about the imagery and symbolism in general terms, describing it as a phoenix representing rebirth and transformation, without revealing the deeply personal story behind its creation. Word of the remarkable tattoo spread quickly through the medical facility staff. As such exceptional artwork was rare among military personnel, by afternoon, rumors had reached the training companies that one of the recruits possessed an extraordinary piece of body art that had impressed everyone who saw it. Sarah realized that her carefully maintained privacy was about to become impossible to preserve. Drill Sergeant Williams was informed of the documentation results through official channels, but his interest went beyond standard administrative requirements. The medical report described not only the tattoo's physical characteristics, but also noted the recruit's emotional response during the examination. The technician had observed signs of deep personal attachment to the artwork that suggested significant meaning beyond aesthetic appreciation. That evening, Williams approached Sarah during her additional duty assignment. which involved organizing equipment in the supply room. He worked alongside her in silence for several minutes before addressing the subject they both knew was on his mind. His questions were respectful but probing, clearly attempting to understand the story behind such an elaborate and expensive piece of art. Sarah found herself sharing more than she had intended, describing her brother's service and injury without revealing all the details of how it had affected her own life decisions. Williams listened carefully, his experienced intuition telling him there were deeper layers to this story than what he was hearing. Her emotional response to discussing her brother suggested a level of personal investment that went beyond typical family concern. As their conversation continued, Williams began to understand that Sarah's motivation for military service was far more complex and powerful than what appeared in her recruitment interviews. Her dedication and performance suddenly made sense in a new context. She wasn't just pursuing personal challenge or career opportunities. She was carrying forward a legacy of service that had been interrupted by tragedy. The revelation changed Williams's perception of Sarah in subtle but significant ways. Her resilience during the harassment campaigns, her exceptional performance under pressure, and her natural leadership abilities all took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of personal sacrifice and family honor. He realized he was looking at someone whose commitment to service ran deeper than most career soldiers ever achieved. Williams made a decision that would alter the trajectory of Sarah's military career. Based on her exceptional performance, her obvious leadership potential, and now his understanding of her deeper motivations, he would recommend her for advanced training opportunities that were typically reserved for the most promising candidates. Her tattoo had inadvertently revealed the character and dedication that made her worthy of special consideration. The final weeks of boot camp transformed into something entirely different for Sarah. Word of her exceptional tattoo and the story behind it had spread throughout the training facility. But rather than creating unwanted attention, it had earned her a new level of respect from both instructors and fellow recruits. The phoenix on her back had become a symbol not just of personal transformation, but of the deeper purpose that drove her military service. Drill Sergeant Williams had quietly arranged for Sarah to participate in advanced leadership exercises typically reserved for the most promising candidates from multiple training cycles. These additional challenges tested her ability to make decisions under extreme pressure, coordinate complex operations, and inspire others to perform beyond their perceived limitations. Sarah excelled in every scenario, demonstrating natural command presence that impressed even seasoned military instructors. Her relationship with the other recruits had evolved dramatically since the confrontation with Johnson and the revelation of her tattoo's significance. Jennifer and Amanda, the other female recruits who had initially distanced themselves from her, now sought her advice and support. Even some of the male recruits who had participated in the early harassment began approaching her with genuine respect and curiosity about her experiences. Private Thompson, who had been one of Johnson's followers, made a point of apologizing privately for his earlier behavior. He explained that learning about her brother's sacrifice had made him realize how shallow and cruel their treatment had been. Sarah accepted his apology graciously, understanding that growth and learning were part of what military service was supposed to accomplish for everyone involved. The physical demands of training had shaped Sarah's body into that of a true athlete, but the mental and emotional challenges had forged something even more valuable. Her confidence had grown from quiet determination into natural leadership authority. Other recruits instinctively looked to her for guidance during difficult exercises, and she found herself naturally taking charge in situations that required quick thinking and decisive action. Williams observed these developments with satisfaction, knowing that his instincts about Sarah's potential had been proven correct. Her personnel file now contained recommendations for specialized training programs that could lead to roles in military intelligence, special operations support, or officer candidacy. Her combination of artistic background, analytical thinking, and proven leadership ability made her valuable for assignments that required both creativity and military discipline. During their final week of training, the entire platoon participated in a graduation exercise that would demonstrate everything they had learned during their transformation from civilians to soldiers. Sarah was selected as one of the squad leaders, responsible for coordinating her team's performance during complex tactical scenarios that tested every aspect of their training. The exercise took place over 3 days and included navigation challenges, combat simulations, leadership rotations, and problem-solving scenarios designed to push recruits to their absolute limits. Sarah's team performed exceptionally well, with her steady leadership and strategic thinking helping them overcome obstacles that defeated several other squads. Her ability to remain calm under pressure and make sound decisions quickly earned praise from multiple instructors. On the final day of the exercise, an unexpected situation arose that would provide the ultimate test of everything Sarah had learned. During a simulated rescue mission, one of the recruits in another squad suffered a genuine injury that required immediate medical attention and evacuation from the remote training area. The exercise controllers were overwhelmed coordinating the real emergency response while maintaining safety for the other participants. Sarah recognized the chaos developing in the command structure and took initiative to organize the uninjured recruits into an effective support system. She coordinated communication between the medical team and field personnel, established security perimeters to protect the evacuation zone, and managed logistics to ensure all equipment and personnel were accounted for during the emergency response. Drill Sergeant Williams watched Sarah's performance during this real crisis with amazement. Her ability to step up during genuine emergency conditions, taking charge of a situation that wasn't her official responsibility, demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership potential he had recognized months earlier. She had transformed from a nervous artist seeking to prove herself into a natural leader others instinctively trusted and followed. The graduation ceremony took place on a crisp morning with families gathered to witness their children's transformation from civilians to soldiers. Sarah's parents had flown in from California, along with her brother Michael in his wheelchair, all wearing expressions of pride mixed with amazement at the confident soldier their daughter had become. When Sarah's name was called for special recognition, she stepped forward to receive commendations for exceptional leadership and academic achievement. But the moment that meant the most came when Drill Sergeant Williams personally presented her with orders for advanced training that would begin immediately after her brief leave period. The assignment would prepare her for specialized roles that utilized both her artistic background and her proven military capabilities. After the ceremony, Williams approached Sarah's family to explain how exceptional her performance had been throughout training. He told them about her leadership during the emergency situation, her academic achievements, and her natural ability to inspire others to perform their best. Michael listened with obvious pride as Williams described how his sister had honored their family's military tradition through her own remarkable service. As the families dispersed and the newly graduated soldiers prepared for their next assignments, Sarah took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her from nervous recruit to recognized leader. The harassment and challenges that had seemed so overwhelming during her first weeks now felt like necessary trials that had tested and strengthened her character. The phoenix tattoo on her back had revealed far more than artwork to those who learned its story. It had become a symbol of transformation, sacrifice, and the deep personal motivations that drive true service members to excel beyond their own expectations. Sarah realized that her brother's injury, which had once seemed like a devastating tragedy, had ultimately led her to discover capabilities and purpose she never knew she possessed. Standing in her perfectly pressed uniform with her orders for advanced training in hand, Sarah understood that boot camp had been just the beginning of a military career that would honor both her own potential and her family's legacy of service. The scared young woman who had stepped off the bus months earlier had been reborn as a confident soldier ready to serve her country with distinction.